So I named this chapter Rosie. And the reason I named this chapter Rosie is that Rosie was my grandmother, Grandma Rosie. We used to call her Nana. Anyway, Rosie has a very interesting story, and it relates to my musical journey. Rosie came over here in 1903, and along with 10 brothers and sisters, and lived on the Lower East Side. And she and all the brothers and sisters were in vaudeville. So they were all hams and they were all entertainers, and that's how I think it's just in my blood that I ended up doing what I'm doing. So that's about that. But the interesting story about Rosie is she was the oldest of her brothers and sisters, and her mom died in childbirth. So she had to take care of all her brothers and sisters and go to school and try to, she was just an incredible woman. And it's funny because she was best friend down on the Lower East Side, which you've seen in a lot of movies. On the Lower East Side, she hung out with George Burns' sister. Now you know George Burns, you know who he is, and his sister was my grandmother's best friend, was Rosie's best friend, and they hung out together. And George Burns, who at the time, this is Rosie's story, told me about it. At the time, his name was George Birnbaum. Okay, he changed it to George Burns because I guess people just don't want to sound Jewish or whatever. But anyway, he was interested in taking my grandmother out. So he used to take her out, but he used to show up at the door, and she used to open the door, and he used to do this whole song and dance and act crazy and everything. And she said that my great grandfather, her father, used to come to the door and say, "What are you going out with that Meshuggah for?" And my grandma Rosie used to turn to me and she said, "He would only roll over in his grave if he knew how much money he made." So anyway, it turned out that actually George Burns proposed to my grandmother. And so I guess it was a hot romance. And she was very much like Gracie Allen. So, I mean, she really had that personality. But what happened is my grandmother Rosie's father took ill, lung disease, and they moved down to Florida, and she had three of the sisters and brothers left. The other ones were grown. And she had to take care of these three kids, or else they were going to go into an orphanage. So Benjamin Schramm, who had a bar in Chicago, fell in love with my grandmother and was willing to take the three sisters in. So they got married. She didn't really love him, but she wanted to take care of her sisters and brothers. And they got married, and she took care of them, and they grew up, and they had lives and all of that. And then it's funny because Benjamin, he ended up working for Western Union in Wall Street, now down on Wall Street, and he ended up being a bookie. He used to do it. It was like he was a big bookie. So I come from, some really weird kind of crazy family thing. But Rosie was hysterical. She was really cool. And I just wanted to tell you the story because I always thought it was a really interesting story. And the vaudeville thing and the way that they were, I mean, when I was a kid and I used to hang out with my, great aunts and great uncles, they were just hysterical. They would just be joking around all the time, and they sang and they danced. And that's what I come from. And that's part of my musical journey.